my name's Brandon. I thought I'd continue my video on encompassing the map of Satisfactory with Hypertubes. Left the timer at 53 minutes. I hope everyone's okay with that discrepancy in time. I added 5 minutes to where I left off. Getting back into the hang of recording. Trying to figure out what would be fun to talk about. Immediate thought is sort of serious thoughts. One in particular is the subject of mental cognitive load, along the lines of delirium and my experiences with it. I've always considered delirium as a sort of extreme mental perspective of what's going on in the world, in your life. Gotta be wary of... Oh. I guess those things don't have a huge pickup range to attack you. Let's make that a 6, because I think that plays kind of funny. Did a fun loop around this, because I didn't want to map out the area up above there. So I thought I'd overcompensate by going in a little. So delirium, to me, has been just a thought experiment where I shame on me, I should have definitely been more prepared on the topic. But it's also delving a bit into mental health and being open and exposing your inner thoughts to others. But a loose explanation of what I think delirium means, at least to me, is you're experiencing a high level of stimulus, which is usually involves high emotions, and yet you don't experience any significant level of emotions. You're not extremely happy, extremely sad, upset. And that you get a high sense of emotion that might come back to bite you later on. But in the moment, it's just a rather dull sensation. Maybe it's the mind's way of tricking yourself into dealing with any overstimulation and then letting you react in a fight or flight response situation and eventually be able to take care of it when your body and mind needs to. Alright, I stand corrected. I thought you wouldn't see more than one in any particular place, but there's now 4. Let's make that the newest record. 5. I see 5. I do need to remember to slow down. Maybe pause the timer at some point, just so I can give an opportunity to look at the game, gush over it some more. Of course, we're at the very back of the map, which I like. The aesthetic here, it feels like no man's land. Kind of alone in the world. Brings thoughts to me of a moment to stop and think, reflect, or pause and just take a breather. So besides the stark, non-existent wildlife in the area, I think it's still got its own beauty. Can't have absolute gorgeous scenery everywhere. That would be asking too much of creators. And everyone needs lulls in media or entertainment to give them a chance, a bit of a psychological approach to let the brain catch up, collect its thoughts. Solidify any extraneous elements, finalize any perspectives or the like, then filter out or filter in anything that the reader or observer themselves would choose to send to long-term memory, memory, and ultimately define their enjoyment of what they're reading or watching or playing. That also ties into why there's a good amount of enjoyment in rereading, rewatching something, replayability, because you could essentially forget an element that you didn't think too extensively on and reintroduce it to your brain, or maybe discover something new. And so having not dedicated too much mental prowess and effort into locking something down, you've created an opportunity for your mind to find new enjoyment in something old. Or of course, there's the opportunity to revisit the classics, the parts that brought you to that in the first place. Bit more on the delirium point. I definitely attribute part of my current delirium with attempting this challenge, personal social experiment, to see if I can see myself as a content creator via videos uploading to YouTube, playing one of my favorite games. And so while I'm trying to keep up the mental prowess and conversation level, I'm also fighting over the challenge of learning to multitask and see how I fit in with a content creator crowd. That feels like a mouthful, triple C's. Kind of excited for where we're about to get to on the map. I'm seeing off of the distance some beach life, which looks similar to some trees we've seen before. But it also looked like a little bit of an oasis in the middle of no man's land. I'm looking for points, again, where I've clearly added a foundation to the belts. I'm trying to keep up consistency with my placement. Some spots seem pretty straight. There was probably one in the middle here, as you can't place an infinite length belt. Another part of probably slowing down is to prevent any vertigo in anyone watching this. Don't want to make anyone nauseous. One of my favorite aesthetics in any video game is either the desert or the icy tundra. Both of them obviously are easily created palettes, but I think they are one of the more challenging visuals for a game designer to approach, because everyone has their own take or twist on what that should look like. In some games it's hard to create the perfect rolling dunes or icy tundra where somebody playing a game or enjoying a visual might not get the best experience because in either there's sandstorms or snowstorms, which hopefully don't appear too periodically. And although are a nice touch, do take away from the visual beauty that is created in both deserts and snowscapes. I guess that adds on to the simplicity of the area, also adds then to the simplicity of what things that could accompany it, such as this beach right here would be an opportunity to look out on the water, although CGI and computer generated visuals that have a flat texture at the end that partially look 3D does pretty accurately reflect a true beach experience, as long as you're not paying too much to the textures or repeating waves textures in the water. And then you could say going through this area of purplish grass, which definitely seems alien, and purple plants, is a nice break in the beach, and also immediately to red rock. This is a pretty interesting biome. That is another reflection of life, that while seeking out the simplicity and enjoying a beachfront, looking out at the waves or rolling sands, you could also find hidden gems. Little spots where you wouldn't have expected some plant life or some sea creatures to be living. Small little pools that clams and starfish collected in. That you can find this small little beautiful spot, call it all your own. Think to yourself, no one else has seen this before, or I'm the first one to discover it. And then just enjoy the beauty that is nature itself. Thought I'd freeze. With the autosave, I'd freeze in place, facing something that's more palatable to look at than these factory belts and tubes. Kind of froze it on the side of a cliff face. Not incredible screensaver visuals, but it's something. Looks like we're getting off of the beachfront and going back up to heights, so apologize for anyone squeamish with heights. Maybe that's a saving element, that if I'm turning fast, there's not much time to look down or look out and trigger any fear of heights. Of course, there's always the opportunity to pause, but I'll tie that into the challenge of trying to keep everything flowing smoothly and being able to keep up the conversation. I might not pause to take any account for the visuals, especially since we're surrounded by two rock cliff faces. This I was considering as one of the extra efforts I took into making the belt feel like it was a good amount of length around the world. I didn't have to dive through this inlet of water, but I definitely view it as a nice little touch to the belt around the map. And also it, although apparently clipping through the cliff, I imagine that was one of the updates that created extra rocks and textures everywhere. I will try and leave that partially through the rocks, because that seems like a fun little twist. Give that a 0.5 into the odd tube placements. I think that puts it at 6.5. Back to solid ground, so take a breather while you can on flat ground before we get back up to the other side of the cliff wall. Sorry, I was pausing the timer, and I thought I'd just take a peek up here to show this side of the map. Also like the jungle aesthetic. This one doesn't seem too expansive compared to a dense jungle exploration kind of game. Looks like there's a Mercer sphere there. Also gives a bit of an Oasis feel.
Breaking news from Earth. Widespread chaos and
I'm gonna talk over that. Again, those rib-like rock structures. Nice to see those thrown in here, and I believe that area goes deeper into a jungle slash enclosed area. Might be reminiscent of a exploration feel. Getting lost deep in the jungle. Trying to find a lost hidden temple or discover something of nature that may not have ever been seen before. Looks like here's another one of those. Let's get as close as we can and do it again. I like the... looks like it does it for a huge amount of this area. Alright, I guess we're going off-road here. I've tried to clip through the rock faces with trains. I imagine that's one of the easiest ways to do it, besides the tube. Wherein if you're doing it with the tube, then you aren't able to get out when you want to. But with trains, you are able to stop the train mid-rail and get off of it if you so please. And I just realized how low I am on iron plates and concrete, so that's a darn shame for trying to keep up productivity. But we're pretty close to that train depot that had a launch point, so I should be able to get back to the main base and back to this spot in particular quite quickly, as long as I don't overshoot. And I guess this would be another opportunity to check out that jungle area. But of course also dealing with the unwieldy explorer. Oh, and destroy more plant life. Can't forget that too. And push some local life out of the way as well. Didn't realize that had some potential. Oh, I guess it ragdolled, because it looked like it popped back up and was moving just fine. But if you run into the trampoline walkers, you get the same experience. You wouldn't be able to... a different experience. You wouldn't be able to knock it over. That was interesting to see the wheels compensate in preparation for landing. That goes to show how much effort they went into making this game and play on its namesake, Satisfactory. They do things that are notedly satisfying, like seeing how well they animated the walking animation. Alright, this should just be one quick hop, skip, jump, and flight. I guess I could use this as an opportunity to show and remind myself if this one overshoots you. And I definitely value the opportunity to save here, both for progress and also the inevitable that this is going to overshoot. So it definitely shoots very high. I should be aiming towards the space elevator. But it seems like not having visual on where to touch down is going to put a hamper on where I'm supposed to touch down. Yep. Quite a bit of overshooting. And this might even push me into a boundary where I will take rapid ticking damage. Almost hit it. Alright. Definitely a poor flight. This is probably going to kill me. Oh, I was left with a sliver of health. But let's reload. I definitely view that as a faster means of returning than not. Also ties back into the term save scumming. It's definitely worthwhile to use saves whenever you can when you want to experiment with a game mechanic and don't want to lose progress detrimental to finishing the game. Of course, everyone finds enjoyment in games in different ways. I usually tend on the side of playing it safe, making multiple saves even if I have to. Because the loss of time and guess I would say mental strain by having to deal with something in any particular game takes away from the enjoyment for me. But I also encourage anyone that finds significant satisfaction in challenging parts of games or game modes or games in particular that are designed with difficulty in mind, that they should definitely enjoy those games to their heart's content. I'll try every once in a while to do some of those challenging games. But I also would point out that when a game has a hard cutoff and a painful reset, that it in general detracts from my own personal enjoyment of a game. I'd rather play a game that I can have decent control of, that once I've gained an understanding of the game, that it's also pretty simple with a lot of extra fun variables that let me experiment with the gameplay rather than bashing my head against the same challenge over and over again. Let's see. I think this took me into one of the I actually overshot where I wanted to go. I believe I actually took a counter liberty compared to the other inlet, but I imagine this one has a much smaller mouth entrance to this water area. If not, it doesn't let out there. And I took a much more depressing approach to encompassing the map, but also this one seemed to be a lot longer and covered in apparently poison here. Yep, looks like it'll be smart to go down. That looks like a spider leg, which is a nice little visual on its own. Maybe that will change what I was representing the ribs as. But it appears quickly that I'm quickly coming up on past the halfway point for progress. As long as I can keep up tube placement, this project won't be too far from over. And I believe most of the area around is going to be easier to access on the remainder of the loop around the map than on that first approach, having to deal with traveling through a lot of foresty and jungle like areas. The rest of the map should primarily be open. Some plateau-like cliff faces. So yes, if you noticed, I did not collect any extra resources from the base. No extra sheets or pipes because I left myself a nice little surprise here in anticipation of getting to this point. It's a shame that I didn't anticipate how low I was on the other intrinsic part of placing pipes down, hypertubes down. Let's resume that timer, shall we? Once again, I'm terrible at keeping up the presence of mind for a timer. I suppose that's part of ADHD. Whatever takes up your senses and attention is what you immediately answer with in any particular situation. I guess that could also tie into the flexibility of thought and mental prowess. Our answers would change for the same situation based off of the environment or any elements that are being proposed to us in that moment. Not to say that we would likely or not likely come to the same answer in any particular situation, or if there was too much similarity in a situation. This is a nice discovery. Apparently there were so many resources traveling on the belt that actually reached a backlog of them. At one point I intended to flood the entire belt with iron plates, just as homage to the requirement, the basic elements of a game requirement for a game that in some twist of fate maybe I would call upon the need for these iron plates if somehow I was playing to a point where I had expended everything except what's available here. Some games have finite resources. And if I happen to build any slight reserve that I wasn't aware of, such as leaving those boxes partially full of any resources in case I decide to come back for them, lying around, geocaching or treasure chests that a pirate leaves to be collected later. Pretty similar approach. And I believe at one point I was aware that this waterfall was here, but that's actually a nice discovery. And now I realized what that waterfall also leads to. One of the more things that actually trigger me about this area is looking down this cliff face, peering into a void of fog or mist, seeing things jutting out that seem inhuman or imperceptibly large. It's definitely a marvel to look at, but very much so terror-inducing. I might take a brief moment in a bit when there's a much more open area to look around down there. Of course, that also ties into the absence of anything down there would also detract from any particular enjoyment of looking down there beyond the fear it may induce. One particular visual effect I like to maintain in this game is if I see a foundation to belts, I prefer to get rid of it, unless of course it's serving a function like this, but if it looks gaudy or misplaced, I'll try to collect it. Also a frugality element. Looks like here was another spot where they added extra rock textures. Let's make that the 7th peculiarity. Even though I had no control over it, I'll still give it a value. And I'm also tying those two back before. It looks like, unless I horribly missed it, there wasn't actually a inlet for that second sandy stone with water running with a nice little river surrounded by jungle. There wasn't a spot for me to have traveled in through there. So I'll keep it simple, and rather than undoing the work that I just did, which would also mess with the timer, I'll move past it. This was generally what I was trying to accomplish when placing the belts in the first place. It seems that there are partial textures. We can actually look down there and saw it briefly. There we go. If I spent the effort, I could probably hunt that down, but I'll use this opportunity to create new grounds, new frontier. And place the tubes outside the defined line that I was setting for myself. Also is getting me to discover that a handful of these rock textures are not solid. Makes me think of a fun hide and go seek element. One of the more enjoyable game as a kid. It definitely brings back some nostalgia and wishing for an opportunity to have enjoyed it more. But then that is also a part of growing up. Finding things that you enjoy later in life. I was worried we were hitting an extreme of terrain, which wouldn't make sense. This all seems pretty widely accessible. I'd simply just taken fall damage. Oh, let's make that another blip in placement. And now it's starting to be a difficulty in counting. I'm gonna trust that that was the 9th. You can also use that as a flexible value to use with relation to the combination of that 1 point earlier. Those two blips that I could have considered as 2, was going to call it 1. Just need to log down that I was at 9. Here's another spot I tried to get artsy fartsy with, while also dealing with quick changes in elevation. I thought I'd throw in some quick curves, quick sharp curves. And coming up on this spiral around, thought that was a fun idea to try again, even though it was much smaller than the last one that went around that floating plateau. I'll actually use this as a spot to look out and down into that void beyond. So, disclaimer 3, 2, 1. Yep, first thing I see, that looks like a massive hand. Some scaly ribs, or it could be taken as another spider bug-like leg. Off of the distance more, and just adding on to the scale of this game, of what potential it would have in massive world building. Obviously just a representation of nature and visual beauty. And if these are of this magnitude, I can only imagine how large that one is in comparison to any part of the map here. Coming up on another save, so let that freeze. Also with the setting sun, it's a nice little visual. I had stopped the timer, so let's resume it and resume the task. Oh, that looks to be another extra quirk visual. Never mind, I misspoke. It looks like it is clipping through the rocks, but it does lead from a waterfall and could be a nice touch to a natural rock formation around a waterfall. That could be tied into natural arches, which are generated by wind and water erosion, but at least most arches I'm familiar with are deserty ones that have not a drop of water nearby, have all been formed by wind alone, and yet are still standing the test of time. Begging the question of when they'd ever, if they'll collapse within one's own lifetime. This is surprisingly a very nice dusk looking look right now. Kind of mysterious and ominous off in the distance. Also makes me realize the folly or fault in this project. Looks like I'm disregarding a handful of these foundation points. That for sake of safety and speed I am disregarding. Oh, the dusk fell and became lit night, which is much easier on the eyes. Very bright moon. But the unfortunate part of facing away from any nice looking world features while doing this project means I'll miss anything in particular that would have been eye-catching. That definitely runs the merit of seeking an alternative to this project. Maybe there's a new task I could undergo that is much more world exploring, because there's definitely some nice little hidden caves and junctions and features in this game that spark the mind, curiosity, make you wonder. Apologize, we're peering down again over great depths. But make you wonder about the beauty of the world, any world, and nature, and what, again, tying it to arches even, what over time things develop, formations, and other interesting features of the land happen to come into existence. May realize I try to speak with a particular eloquence, and yet I'll stumble over even the simplest of statements. That's not pleasant, seeing these rapidly fluctuating textures. But does add a little bit to the ambiance of the world. makes me think that it'd be nice to see in more games a particular game element where you can experience with a adjustable slide bars even, or controls of the game. Create your own weather phenomena or elements. Instead of having to deal with the extreme sandstorms or snowstorms that impede your visibility. If, say, at some point you unlock, or is just a basic part of the game's design to enjoy the game, just free control of visuals. Create more story to your own world. Looks like we'll be traveling over another waterfall. Which would be nice after this brief moment of traveling through less than pleasing aesthetic. Floating rock face. Cliff of Death. And it appears that I could restock on resources by simply pulling off the belt at this point. Getting more rods and plates. Seems like a happy little coincidence. Of course, that would rely on waiting for them to come to me, or be collecting them as walking, which would easily double the time spent placing the tubes, especially if I've already placed tubes on a particular spot. So let's hope for another cache box somewhere along here that might happen to be completely full, which does mean I will not be able to empty it, which is unfortunate. I'm going to pause the timer and just peek back up here, look at this waterfront if there's any significant visual enjoyment to it. Can definitely see clipping textures there. Again, curious about the large entities of space that this game introduces. It'd be quite enjoyable to find some story or lore to this game. Instead of looking back off into the great unknown to the left there, I'll give a different disclaimer. I'm going to attempt a experiment. If I recall, this water is actually baseless, that it won't cause you to swim, that you will actually go straight out and down. Nope, I was mistaken. At one point, I believe, maybe close to there, or maybe a different waterfall further along the southern ridge of the world, there's some intangible water, which is definitely fear-inducing in a new way of anticipating one consistency that you have observed in science and nature, and all of a sudden having to experience that it was actually not consistent with what you're familiar with. Alright, there's a discovery for this area. Let's put a pause on that timer again. And just discovered another danger zone of terrain where you're not supposed to be standing. Looks like this is going to add a extra element to this pipe project. Take an effort to avoid unnecessary damage. and not have to deal with dying and lose progress. Assuming that this spot will be safe, I'll be placing the next set of belts from a distance. Sorry, tubes from a distance. Which might be a nice change of pace. Supposedly a slow to the vertigo and nauseating experience I was putting us all through. Just a moment to casually place a couple belts, again, sorry, tubes, along, while avoiding that tick of those ticks damage. I guess I spoke too soon. That I see concrete on the belt. So I must have thought of everything. Being able to create a system that was self-perpetuating. And looks like it ends there, which means if that all is an extreme of danger zone, that I won't be able to access them easily. The nice part about this game is how short the night cycle is. I've come back to day now. I'm gonna do a quick save in case I do discover a spot in the water that drops and that I run out of gas while I try to glide to this belt, assuming that this is safe for extremes. Yes, perpetuating longevity is a nice element. It reminds me of a unique toy design, if we're all familiar with the clacking steel balls that, in an attempt to observe minimalization of friction and loss of potential in kinetic energy, when you set one ball to clack and continue hitting its neighbor, transfers its momentum to through the chain of steel balls and out the other one, sending the one on the opposite end to as great or almost as great of an arc or swing point as the initial starting point. And that eventually that will stop due to friction. And basic understanding of physics and its properties. There's actually a similar device that was made along the concept of a perpetual energy machine. The design being a chute that drops a steel ball, not too dissimilar to the ones portrayed in the other toy, the other physics observation. It drops it from a starting point and travels through two rails like a chute, like a slide, with a sharp turn that propels the marble back to the initial starting point, catching it in a cup or a plate that will eventually lead the ball back to the starting hole. And is actually a pretty neat observation of perpetual energy, if I can gush about it. Because although it proposes a concept of a theoretical or only situationally based perpetual energy, it's still a pretty good representation nonetheless. That we do have a great understanding of physics in general. With time comes learning and understanding. I thought I'd be a bit avant-garde about that placement too, since it clipped through the rocks and I saw that there was some passable terrain. Might as well make use of it, and we'll make that the 10th unique touch point. Unfortunately, this perpetual motion device doesn't really translate to a real world situation. I'm picturing we create steel bubbles that people step into and get strapped in. Presumably in a way that there is no jostling within to keep consistent balance, which adds another level of physics understanding to the challenge. Assuming a perfectly solid steel ball is able to produce a perpetual energy machine compared to what a human with all our flexibility, we would not be able to sit well, let alone anything. We would not be able to sit well and safely inside this contraption as it rolls us through dangerously, trying to reproduce the perpetual motion machine. I'm going to go ahead and pause the timer. I think I did decently at keeping track of the time spent working on placing the tubes and keeping up with the timer. It's running at 1 hour and 38 minutes. And as I've run out of resources and coming up on an hour, I thought that would be a pretty good point to stop. Sun's rising, new day, and ending early. That'd be a nice approach to life. Make retirement easy. It appears that that water texture was faulty there, because looking out here, this is all water. And as we discovered that that was impassable terrain, I imagine even if it could touch down on those rock formations off in the distance, placeholder of the waterfall, and even at some point this water too might drop through. I do not imagine that it's literally safe. English language. It is definitely not safe for your character to be out there. And so to keep it close to home, close to land, close to base, traveling up this rock face. Again, not very visually pleasing, but still a nice desert aesthetic, to say, with more watery oases there, fun, unique, maze-like rock outcroppings, not too dissimilar to real life. So I'm going to call it here. Hope you enjoyed this video. Soon to be done with this project, and sad to see it done, but glad to have done it. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.